December 16th, 1944. The fog-choked forests of the Ardennes. A German Oberst stands in his command half-track, watching the first wave of panzers roll past toward the American lines, their engines roaring like thunder through the pre-dawn darkness. He turns to his adjutant, a smirk cutting across his frost-burned face. Look at them sleeping in their villages, fat and happy behind their thin screen. Patton is racing toward the Rhine like a fool chasing glory. Eisenhower sits in Paris playing politician, and we are about to cut their entire front in half. He lights a cigarette, the glow reflecting off his knight's cross. They call this the Ghost Front. They think the war is over. By the time that Cowboy Patton realizes what's happening, we'll be in Antwerp, and he'll be explaining to Washington how he lost an entire army group. The Americans love their speed. Let's see how fast they run when we hit them where they're weakest. Before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed. Every week we uncover the stories the world forgot. What he didn't know was that the cowboy he mocked had already wargamed this exact scenario 3 weeks earlier, had positioned his entire Third Army to pivot north on 6 hours' notice, and was about to execute a maneuver that military historians would study for the next 80 years as the finest example of armored flexibility in military history. George S. Patton Jr. didn't become ready for the Bulge by accident. He became ready because he understood something about warfare that most of his peers had forgotten in the grinding static battles of Normandy. That modern war is about movement, that the tank is not a mobile pillbox, but a weapon of exploitation, that the army which can concentrate force faster wins regardless of who shoots first. While other commanders planned methodical advances and worried about supply lines and flanks, Patton trained his staff to move entire corps across 100 miles of winter roads without losing cohesion, to shift from offense to defense and back again while maintaining momentum, to treat logistics not as a constraint but as a competitive advantage. His Third Army headquarters ran exercises every week. No-notice operations orders, rapid redeployments, night movements that his staff complained were unrealistic and exhausting. War is unrealistic and exhausting, Patton told them. The Germans are still dangerous. They're going to hit us somewhere, sometime, when we least expect it. And when they do, I want this army to be able to turn on a dime and shove it down their throats so hard they choke on it. The numbers behind Third Army's readiness were staggering. Patton commanded 12 divisions, 4 armored, 8 infantry, roughly 250,000 men backed by the most sophisticated logistics network ever created. His armored divisions each had 263 M4 Sherman tanks and 17,000 men, organized into 3 combat commands that could operate independently or mass for a breakthrough. Each Sherman carried a 75mm gun that could fire 20 rounds per minute with a convergence zone at 800 yards, where all 5 machine guns and the main cannon could engage the same target, a moving wall of lead that shredded anything it touched. His artillery could deliver 18,000 rounds in a fire mission lasting 15 minutes, coordinated through radio networks that linked forward observers to battalion headquarters to the guns in a targeting loop that took 90 seconds from call to impact. But hardware meant nothing without doctrine, and Patton's doctrine was written in blood learned across 2 years of combat from Morocco to Lorraine. The Third Army didn't fight like other Allied formations. It didn't advance on narrow fronts, pausing to consolidate, waiting for supplies. It attacked on broad fronts with multiple axes, accepting risk to maintain speed, bypassing strong points to hit headquarters and supply dumps, treating the enemy rear as the primary target. Patton called it the indirect approach. Let the infantry pin the enemy, let the armor race through the gaps, and keep moving until resistance collapses from chaos and fear. His tank commanders were taught to refuel on the move, to sleep in their vehicles, to navigate by compass at night without lights, to close with the enemy so fast that German anti-tank guns couldn't deploy before Shermans were already past them and shooting up supply convoys. The training pain had been brutal. In the Louisiana maneuvers of 1941, Patton lost more tanks to mechanical failure than enemy action, watched crews abandon vehicles rather than perform field maintenance, saw his carefully planned attacks bogged down, because no one understood that speed creates its own protection. He fired commanders, demoted officers, and instituted a training regime that his own men called sadistic. Tank crews drilled on track replacement until they could do it in darkness in under an hour. Drivers practiced night movement across country without headlights until they could feel terrain through the treads. Mechanics learned to diagnose engine problems by sound, to swap out transmissions in forward areas, to keep vehicles running on salvaged parts and improvised repairs. By Normandy, Third Army maintenance crews were keeping 90% of vehicles operational, a rate that seemed impossible to other units struggling to hit 70%. The tactic that defined Third Army was simple, elegant, and terrifyingly effective. Reconnaissance in force, exploitation in depth, and never stop moving. When Patton scouts found a weak point, they didn't report and wait for orders. They punched through, radioed coordinates, and the nearest combat command rolled through the gap within hours. While the Germans scrambled to figure out where the breakthrough happened, American tanks were already 20 miles deeper, shooting up supply trucks and overrunning headquarters. It created a cascading panic that no amount of courage or tactical skill could overcome. A German general, captured during the race across France, tried to explain it to his interrogators. We would establish a defensive line, commit our reserves, prepare our counterattack, and then Patton would be 40 miles north or south, or somewhere we didn't expect, and our line would collapse not because it was broken, but because it no longer mattered. One of Patton's tank battalion commanders, a hard-eyed lieutenant colonel named Creighton Abrams, put it more simply during a briefing in September 1944. Speed is armor. When we're moving, they can't target us. When we hit them from an unexpected direction, they panic before they fight. We keep rolling, keep the pressure on, and they break, because human beings can't function when they're terrified and exhausted and don't know where the enemy is. This isn't about being brave. It's about being faster and meaner than the other bastard. The first major test came in August 1944 at the Falaise Gap. While British and Canadian forces pressed from the north and American forces pushed from the south, Patton saw the real opportunity, not to trap the Germans in the pocket, but to race east and cut off their retreat routes before they could establish new defensive lines. He sent the 4th Armored Division on a 400-mile end run in 5 days, capturing thousands of prisoners and dozens of towns, while other Allied units were still clearing the Normandy hedgerows. Eisenhower's headquarters was furious. Patton had violated boundaries, ignored orders, and created supply nightmare by advancing faster than the logistics chain could support. Patton didn't care. "I'd rather ask forgiveness than permission," he told his staff. "We just killed the German 7th Army by making them run until they collapsed. That's worth any amount of paperwork." By December, 3rd Army was deep in Lorraine, grinding through the fortified towns along the German border, preparing for a winter offensive toward the Rhine. The fighting was ugly, street by street, building by building, weather so cold that rifles froze and men developed trench foot in hours. The rapid advances of summer and fall had stalled against prepared defenses, minefields, and mud that turned roads into morasses. Other commanders saw it as proof that the war would drag into 1945, that the Germans were beaten but not broken, that the final push into Germany would be a bloody slog. Patton saw something different. He saw an enemy committing reserves to hold ground, saw supply dumps being emptied to sustain the defense, saw a German army that was fighting brilliantly on the tactical level while collapsing strategically. "They're burning their last reserves," he told his intelligence officer. "They're throwing everything into holding us here because they have nothing left for anywhere else, which means somewhere, sometime soon, they're going to gamble. They're going to scrape together every panzer division they can hide from Allied recon, and they're going to hit us where we're weak, and we need to be ready to move the instant it happens." On December 12th, 4 days before the German offensive, Patton held a staff meeting at his headquarters in Nancy. He stood at a map of the Western Front and traced a line with his finger across the Ardennes, the same quiet sector that had been the hinge between American and British forces, lightly held by inexperienced divisions resting from combat. "If I were Hitler," Patton said quietly, "and I had one last roll of the dice, this is where I'd hit. Through here to Antwerp. Cut our supply line. Split our armies. Force Eisenhower to negotiate. It's desperate. It's probably suicidal. But it's the only play that changes the game." His staff looked at each other uncomfortably. The Ardennes was quiet. Intelligence said the Germans were incapable of offensive operations. I want contingency plans. Patton continued. 3 options for pivoting north, 1 division, 3 divisions, or the entire army. Routes, timing, supply, everything. I want it ready, so that when they hit, and they will hit, we can move before anyone else even understands what's happening. His staff thought he was paranoid. Third Army was focused on the Saar offensive, scheduled to kick off in late December. Pulling divisions north would abandon the attack, would cede the initiative, would waste weeks of preparation. But they knew Patton, knew that arguing was pointless, and so they drew up the plans. 3 scenarios: Operation Nickel for 1 division, Operation Dime for 3, Operation Mac for the entire Third Army. Each plan included march routes, fuel requirements, artillery positions, communication protocols. It was an academic exercise, the kind of thing staff officers did to keep busy during the winter lull, and no one really believed it would be used. On December 16th, the Germans launched Operation Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, their last great offensive of the war. 3 armies, 30 divisions, 1,400 tanks and assault guns, 2,000 artillery pieces, all concentrated on an 80-mile front held by 5 American divisions. The attack came in fog so thick that Allied aircraft were grounded, came with complete tactical surprise, came with a ferocity that shattered 2 divisions in the first 6 hours. German paratroopers dropped behind American lines. Saboteurs in American uniforms sowed chaos. And for the first time since Normandy, the Wehrmacht looked like the army that had conquered Europe, confident, aggressive, unstoppable. Eisenhower's headquarters in Versailles took a full day to understand the scale of the attack. Initial reports were confused, local counterattacks, minor probes, nothing that couldn't be handled. By December 17th, the truth was unavoidable. Entire regiments were surrounded. Roads were clogged with refugees and retreating soldiers. German spearheads were racing west toward the Meuse River, and the entire Allied front was in danger of collapse. Eisenhower called an emergency meeting of army commanders at Verdun on December 19th. The mood was grim. Omar Bradley wanted to pull back, to shorten the line and defend. Bernard Montgomery suggested a staged withdrawal to more defensible terrain. The prevailing assumption was that the immediate priority was to stop the German advance, to stabilize the front, and then, weeks or months later, to counterattack. Patton walked into that meeting and said 6 words that changed everything. "When do you want me there?" Eisenhower blinked. "Where?" "Bastogne, the shoulder of the salient. Wherever you need me." Patton pointed at the map. "I can attack north with 3 divisions in 48 hours. 6 divisions in 72. The entire Third Army in a week if you give the word." The room went silent. Bradley spoke first, his voice careful. "George, you're in the middle of an offensive. You're facing east toward Germany. You're saying you can disengage, turn 90 degrees, move 100 miles through winter weather, and attack into the flank of a German offensive, all in 2 days." "I'm saying I already have the orders written," Patton replied. "I'm saying my staff has been planning this for a week. I'm saying Third Army can do what no other army in the world can do, move fast, hit hard, and keep hitting until the other bastard breaks. The Germans think they've surprised us. They think we're going to panic and retreat. Instead, we're going to hit them in the flank so hard they'll wish they'd stayed in their bunkers and waited for the Russians." Montgomery snorted. "Impossible. You can't move that fast in winter. You can't coordinate an attack with that little preparation. This is fantasy." Patton turned to him, and when he spoke his voice was cold. "Watch me." Eisenhower gave the order. Third Army would pivot north, relieve Bastogne, and hit the southern flank of the German offensive with everything it had. The meeting broke up with commanders scrambling to coordinate boundaries, supply routes, and air support. Patton walked out, climbed into his jeep, and was back at his headquarters in Nancy within 3 hours. He called his staff together and said simply, "We're executing Nickel, Dime, and Mac simultaneously. The 4th Armored Division moves tonight. The 26th and 80th Infantry Divisions follow tomorrow. The rest of the Army reorients by December 22nd. Questions?" His chief of staff stared at him. "Sir, that's 6 divisions, 133,000 men, 62,000 vehicles, moving 100 miles north in the middle of winter while maintaining combat readiness. The roads are ice. The weather is zero visibility. The Germans have the momentum and will be hitting prepared defenses from the march. I didn't ask for problems, Patton interrupted. I asked for questions. The orders go out now. Every unit commander gets his march route, his objective, his fire support plan. Radio silence until we cross the line of departure. I want the Germans to wake up on December 22nd and find Third Army in their flank before they even know we've moved. This is what we've trained for. This is why we're better than them. Now get to work. The range and role shift was total. Third Army had been a strategic offensive force aimed at the Rhine. In 72 hours, it became the counterattack that saved the entire Allied campaign. Units that had been attacking fortified positions were now conducting mobile warfare, exploiting gaps, encircling German units that had overextended. Artillery battalions that had been firing planned barges on map coordinates were now conducting fire missions on the move, forward observers calling in targets as they saw them, guns displacing every 6 hours to keep pace with the advance. Engineer companies that had been clearing mines were now building bridges under fire, laying corduroy roads across frozen mud, keeping supply lines open through terrain that should have been impassable. The enemy respect didn't come slowly. It came all at once, crystallized in a moment when German commanders realized they weren't fighting a defensive reaction, but a fully coordinated offensive. Intercepted radio transmissions, decoded by Ultra, showed the panic spreading through Wehrmacht headquarters. Patton has turned his entire army north. Third Army is attacking in strength toward Huffeleis. Request immediate reinforcement. We cannot hold against this pressure. A German corps commander, later captured, admitted in his interrogation, "We thought we had surprised you. We thought you would take weeks to respond, that we would reach the Meuse before you could concentrate forces. Instead, Patton hit us in 3 days with 6 divisions and fought as if he had been planning this for months. Either he is clairvoyant or your intelligence is far better than we believed. Either way, it was terrifying." The industrial avalanche behind Third Army was something the Germans simply couldn't comprehend. American factories were producing 2,000 tanks per month, and shipping them to Europe in numbers that replaced combat losses within days. When the 4th Armored Division lost 25 Shermans breaking through to Bastogne, 30 replacement tanks arrived within 48 hours, fresh from Antwerp, crewed by replacement personnel who had trained stateside for 6 months and arrived ready to fight. German panzer divisions, by contrast, were cannibalizing damaged vehicles for parts, running tanks with half their road wheels missing, going into combat with 60% strength and no prospect of reinforcement. The asymmetry was crushing, not on the battlefield, where individual engagements were brutal and losses heavy, but in the strategic balance, where American losses were temporary and German losses were permanent. American pilots flying in support of Third Army flew 12,000 sorties in the last 2 weeks of December once the weather cleared, an average of 850 per day. They flew P-47 Thunderbolts loaded with 8.50 caliber machine guns and 2,500 pounds of bombs or rockets, turned German columns into burning wreckage, cratered roads, destroyed bridges, and made daylight movement suicidal for the Wehrmacht. The close air support network was so responsive that forward observers could call in strikes within 20 minutes, could direct fighters onto targets by radio, could adjust fire in real time as the tactical situation developed. German soldiers who survived the Bulge talked about the constant sound of American engines overhead, the terror of knowing that any concentration of vehicles or troops would be attacked within minutes, the hopelessness of trying to move supplies or reinforcements when the sky belonged completely to the enemy. The final boss was the German 5th Panzer Army, the main effort of the offensive, a force that included elite SS divisions, Tiger tanks, and veteran troops who had held the Eastern Front against Soviet offensives. They were supposed to break through to Antwerp, supposed to split the Allied armies and force a negotiated peace. Instead, they found themselves locked in a grinding battle against Third Army's southern flank, unable to advance or retreat, bleeding divisions in attrition fights they couldn't win. On January 3, 1945, Third Army launched Operation Smash, a coordinated offensive by 8 divisions aimed at cutting off the German salient at its base. The attack went in behind a rolling artillery barrage that fired 20,000 rounds in 30 minutes. A curtain of steel that walked forward at 100 yards per minute with infantry and tanks following close behind. The Germans broke. Not immediately, not everywhere, but the collapse was visible in the disintegration of unit cohesion, in the increasing number of prisoners who surrendered without fighting, in the radio intercepts showing commanders requesting permission to withdraw and being denied by a high command that still believed war could overcome material reality. By January 16th, the Bulge had been reduced to a bulge. German forces pushed back to their start lines, having lost 100,000 casualties, 800 tanks, and 1,000 aircraft for gains that lasted less than a month. The Wehrmacht had gambled everything on one last offensive and lost not just the battle, but the strategic reserve, the fuel stockpiles, the panzer divisions it couldn't replace. After the Bulge, the German army in the West never launched another offensive. It could only defend, and even that was collapsing. Operation Thunderbolt, launched on January 30th, was Patton's answer to anyone who thought the Bulge had exhausted Third Army. 10 divisions attacked toward the Rhine on a 50-mile front, broke through German lines in 3 days, advanced 80 miles in 2 weeks, and crossed into Germany proper with momentum the Wehrmacht couldn't stop. The operation killed or captured 25,000 German soldiers, destroyed 200 tanks, and proved what Patton had been saying since December. That Third Army wasn't just reactive, wasn't just responding to German initiatives, but was the dominant offensive force on the Western Front, capable of sustained operations that ground down anything in front of it. The scoreboard was devastating. From December 22nd to January 31st, Third Army advanced 140 miles, engaged in defeated elements of 13 German divisions, captured 37,000 prisoners, destroyed or captured 700 tanks and assault guns, killed an estimated 50,000 enemy soldiers, and did it while suffering 34,000 casualties of its own, a ratio that demonstrated not superiority of courage, but superiority of system. Third Army fired 4.8 million artillery rounds in 6 weeks, a number so large it represented more ammunition than the entire German army expended on all fronts in the same period. American supply convoys delivered 100,000 tons of supplies per week to forward dumps, kept the offensive rolling without pause, without the fuel crises and ammunition shortages that paralyzed German operations. The logistics tail wasn't a weakness, it was a weapon, as lethal as any tank or gun because it enabled a tempo of operations the enemy couldn't match.